Are we forever chasing rainbows? Can you remember the last time you were dreaming of buying a new vehicle, getting a raise at work, moving into a nicer house, or finding a partner to share life with? Do you remember fantasizing about how happy you would be if you attained those things? If you finally did attain one of those things, you may have found that the happiness boost didn't last that long or wasn't as intense as you imagined. Most of us have gone through this cycle. So here today on A Matter of Facts, we will show you a group of scientists that have discovered why your happiness is short-lived and what you can do to prolong it. The dreaded hedonic treadmill, also known as the hedonic adaptation, is the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable baseline of happiness regardless of what happens to them. Here's how it works. Let's say you just started a new romance or were promoted at work. These events may cause a brief burst of extra joy, but the events will not necessarily change people's everyday levels of happiness long term. Instead, people often adjust their expectation to the new status quo and find themselves desiring even more to maintain the same level of happiness. Similarly, even very negative events will typically not keep a person depressed forever. An example would be such a sudden loss of a job or the passing of a loved one. Eventually, your levels of happiness return to where it started, or at least closer to the baseline than immediately after the event.
I'd like to begin by taking my right hand and place it on your right shoulder. Would that be acceptable?
That is acceptable, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Now I'd like to take this left hand of mine.
Yes.
And place it.
People who begin romantic relationships tend to eventually get used to, and perhaps begin to take for granted, much that is positive about being with a partner. Initially, novel and exciting attributes or shared experiences may become less appreciated over time. And among married couples, an increase in happiness during the honeymoon period is likely to revert to the baseline. Efforts to rejuvenate the relationship, such as seeking to incorporate variety into shared experiences, might help to counteract the process of habituation. Now, many researchers have examined this phenomenon and have attempted to determine how much of our happiness is really under our control. Brickman and Campbell's original 1971 research on the hedonic adaptation studied two sets of people. One was a group of people who won large lottery prizes, and the other was a group of accident victims who were now paralyzed, including quadriplegics and paraplegics. The research revealed that in the long term, neither group appeared to be happier than the other. Of course, the lottery winners and the paralyzed victims experienced initial reactions of happiness and sadness, respectively. Therefore, the effects didn't turn out to be long-lasting, and people in both groups shortly reverted to their previous level of happiness. In the original theory of hedonic adaptation, Brickman and Campbell proposed that people immediately react to good and bad events, but in a short time return to neutrality. However, if this theory put forth by Brickman and Campbell is correct, any effort to increase happiness is pointless, meaning that if our happiness set point is on the low end of the spectrum, we're doomed to unhappiness. The good news is that further research led by Ed Diner has refined the initial findings and brought greater understanding into the subtleties of the hedonic cycle.
Those positive experiences tell us that our life is going well, the way we want it. Contrary-wise, negative feelings, anger, sadness, stress, tell us something's wrong with our lives. So we have all these various forms of subjective well-being, happiness, that we study in our lab.
Studies have shown that our circumstances don't account for most of our happiness. Let me explain. Each person has a happiness set point, which refers to one's genetically determined predisposition for happiness. Now, this set point for happiness is responsible for about 50% of the differences in happiness from person to person. In her book, The How of Happiness, researcher Sonja Lyubomirsky said that,
what are the most important determinants of happiness? And the theory is in the form of a pie chart, so it's very kind of simple, easy to understand. And so this is very simplistic. Basically, I'm going to give you some numbers that are averages and approximations from many past studies. These numbers are not set in stone. They're just approximations. So approximately 50% of the variance in happiness is due to our genes. So when you look at all the people sitting in this room today, and if you ask the question, why are some of you happier than others? About 50% of the answer lies in genetics.
your actions, thoughts, and attitudes account for about 40% of your happiness, which is quite significant. The final 10% is determined by external circumstances. Now, here are 5 points supported by more recent research to take into consideration. Number 1, the set point is not neutral. After reviewing the data from earlier studies on the hedonic treadmill, Diner, Lucas, and Skolin found that approximately 3/4 of the samples studied reported positive dispositions above neutral. Even in diverse populations, including the Amish and the African Maasai, the well-being levels were above neutral. So even if people adapt and return to a previous point, it's a positive rather than a neutral one. Number 2, the set point is individualized. Recent research shows that even if a person has a set point, it varies significantly from person to person. Personality traits play a role in someone's happiness set point, and their well-being is moderately heritable. So, different personality traits may predispose individuals to different levels of well-being. Number 3, we have multiple set points. The notion of a set point suggests that each person has a single static baseline of happiness. But more recent work by Diner, Sue, Lucas, and Smith complicates this theory by arguing that happiness is composed of different factors that contribute to well-being, and these factors sometimes move in different directions. For example, one could have positive and negative emotions in decline, but life satisfaction on the rise. The basic idea is that different forms of well-being can move in different directions at the same time. Number 4, happiness can change. One of the conclusions often drawn from this first study is that no matter what we do, we can affect lasting change on our levels of well-being and life satisfaction. Examining the well-being levels of nations might help clarify this, as research on this specific topic is scarce. If there are marked differences in well-beings across nations, and these differences can be predicted from objective characteristics of those nations, that could mean that circumstances can have a long-term impact on well-being. For example, one study cited that nations higher than average wealth and support for human rights were strong predictors of the well-being of its residents. Researchers at The Economist also reported that 85% of the variance in well-beings between nations can be explained by several factors that included gross domestic product per person, life expectancy at birth, political stability, and divorce rates. So the question is, can our long-term average level of happiness change? To answer this question, Fujito and Diner designed a longitudinal study that examined changes in the baseline level of well-being over a period of 17 years in a large sample of Germans. The researchers found that even though there was a significant stability in the happiness assessments, 24% of the participants still experienced a significant change to their happiness level, and 9% of participants changed by 2 standard deviations or more. It seemed that the long-lasting change is possible. Number 5, individual differences in adaptation. Another assumption stemming from the original hedonic treadmill theory is that adaptation happens the same way for everyone. But research shows that there are individual differences in the rate and extent of the adaptation. One of the explanations for this is that atypical events or big shifts in our lives may produce the greatest change in happiness. So the question is, can we escape the hedonic treadmill or stop chasing rainbows? A 2008 study by Barbara Fredrickson and colleague Cohen, Coffey, Peck, and Finkel showed that the streams of positive emotions induced through loving kind of meditation can outpace the effects of the hedonic treadmill. Researchers suggest that this kind of mind training practice not only changes past and emotional states, but also reshapes enduring personality traits by helping us learn about the nature of our minds. Practicing loving kind of meditation also helps dismantle false assumptions about what leads to happiness and well-being. Over time, meditation may be the gateway to create insight that change our outlooks on ourselves and others, thereby increasing empathy and compassion. Now, there are differences in happiness. Despite the hedonic treadmill, some people have an inherently optimistic nature. They seem much happier than others, no matter what is happening in their lives. I think we all know people like that. In Sonja Lyubomirsky's research on this subject, she found that happy individuals perceive, interpret, and subsequently think about life events and life circumstances in more positive ways than negative ones. These differences in cognitive processes may in turn reinforce and promote people's affective dispositions. Happy individuals can evaluate events, especially negative ones, in positive and productive ways. Unhappy individuals tend to dwell on the negative aspect of events, find things are wrong about positive events, or ruminate on how things were better before. Hey guys, we come to the end of the video. In the comment section, let us know if your natural set point is more positive, negative, or neutral. Also, please subscribe to our channel, and if you like the video, please click the like button. Until then, we'll see you next time.